equal spin. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 10200, the Politics and Media podcast. We're here for a midweek episode with a special guest. Welcome to podcast, Mardi O'Connor. How are you doing?
I'm well, Kyle. How are you?
I have COVID.
Hey,
but...
I just got over the flu, so look at us.
Wow, we're really thriving out here. Yeah, I think this is the last chance I have to record something for a couple of weeks before I really fall off a cliff. So, but I've been looking forward to this. You know, we've had a back and forth about this for the last 12 months, having you on the podcast to talk about this topic, which is what's happening in the West Bank and Palestine. Do you want to just give a quick, for our audience that didn't catch you on some of the previous episodes you've been on or live streams, a quick, what's the word? Fuck, I am losing it. A quick intro, just like what you're doing, kind of where you come from.
Sure. Okay. I'm very much in flux right now, but I'm Aotearoa born. I've for a while lived in Oz. I was in the States last year. I do typically work as a trade unionist, but I am currently unemployed because I only just arrived back in Melbourne. I spent nearly 3 months in the West Bank, so volunteering in Masafer Yatta in occupied Palestine. And I left not quite under my own terms. My visa was nearly up, but the Israelis did detain, arrest, and later jail and deport me. So yeah, and I've been planning to do it for quite a while. I'd actually first heard about the work formally last year in, I believe it was October. So Ayşenur Aygi, she was a Turkish-American activist with the International Solidarity Movement Palestine, and she was shot by the IDF quite deliberately, by all accounts, while she was protesting in Beta. So that led me to the work the ISM were doing, so protective presence work around the West Bank, mostly in the Jordan Valley and Masafer Yatta, which I hadn't known this at the time. That was so Masafer Yatta is where the Oscar-winning documentary No Other Land was filmed, and I got to meet some of the directors and filmmakers of that as well, who are still being
just murdered.
Yeah, he was a friend of all the activists there. It was really, really harrowing stuff. Yeah, that was a week after I was deported, actually. There was a real escalation, it seemed, in like a palpable escalation in settler violence in the area. And and it's come out now, he recorded his own death in Al-Khair, which was very near where I was living. And I mean, still, Basil, who was one of the key directors, would still be pulled over. Last time I saw him, he dropped me at a location and then he drove away, and you saw him get pulled over by the army and questioned for a while. So it was just, it was relentless. Hamdan, another one of the directors, was kidnapped from his home in March. And the area he lives, Susia, is under real attack right now. There's a huge escalation. There has been for a while. The Israelis declared it a temporary closed military zone. The main point of that seems to be to keep activists from getting to these sorts of areas. It nominally means that only residents can be there, but so not the settlers in the nearby towns. It generally means, though, that settlers still invade with impunity, and there are a few other people who can access to document this. So that was a bit of a rant, but it's quite grim shit there at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I guess just for definition, what do you mean by protective presence?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I should have gone right back to that. So essentially you're staying with families who are under threat in areas where you get a lot of violent settler incursions, and you live with them. It's beyond the horrors. It's one of maybe the best things that's ever happened to me. Like you live with wonderful families, and you eat with them, and you're looking after their kids, and if they're shepherding, you go out shepherding with them. Essentially you're living with them, but if they're menaced by settlers, which is fairly inevitable, you're there to document that. So your presence is peaceful, which is fairly challenging in itself. and you might be a liaison with them if the police come or the army come. That's not necessarily particularly helpful, which was something I found a bit frustrating. I mean, the families would see you as a objectively privileged foreigner and might think you might have a bit more, your word with cops might have a bit more weight than it does. Sometimes it didn't necessarily. But yeah, you're there to observe and to document, and best case scenario to repel particularly aggressive settler violence.
Far out.
Yeah. It feels, it's just incremental stuff. And that again makes it very hard. And there are not, certainly since COVID, and then it picked up a bit. And then since October 7th, there are fewer foreigners doing this sort of work, which means not every family can be covered at all times. That's very hard in itself. And even if you are there, it might be the difference between someone having their donkey stolen while you watch and film it, which is something I did, versus someone having their house broken into while they stand there and a settler taking a shit on the floor. Like it's the families value the presence. Yeah, no, that can happen too. So it's work that the families value because it creates sort of a bit more safety and security, but it's not, you feel like you're just holding back a tide with a spoon.
Yeah,
I don't want to be bleak about it because it does, it is something that it's what people valued and it gives people hope, but it still felt very hard and that there weren't enough of us.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where we can be honest about the situation without being nihilist about it, right? And I think
exactly.
I guess the context for people who haven't been following what's happening in Palestine to the same extent.
Other thing I should say too, that there are Israelis doing that work too, which is not many, which is a bit of an indictment, not upon the people who do it, who are incredible and staunch, but maybe a few dozen Israelis doing this really committed work across the West Bank. And they'll spend, like weekends or half their week coming and staying with families, and they speak fluent Arabic and they're really respected by the people there. And which is key, they can't be deported. So but there are not. You see Israelis take to the street every now and then. You think if you're a peacenik, this would be great work for you to do, or you could just get down to Gaza and break through a fence. But so it's mostly foreigners and some Israelis in steady numbers.
Yeah, with the what's been happening in the West Bank and the escalation since 2023, I think it's something that has just been covered quite absurdly in Western media. Obviously, just an enormous amount of what we just call pro-genocide or genocide apologia or running cover for genocide across Western media as regards Gaza. But the West Bank has been even more ignored. And I think partly because what's been happening there and the escalations of the IDF and of settler violence give the lie to the idea that what's happening in Gaza is somehow contained, or that it isn't a genocide, or etc. But then every so often you'll see a news piece or a political act, a political decision from a Western leader, which leans on the West Bank to show, hey, look, we are doing something, such as, oh, we're going to boycott companies that are directly involved with settling, right? Or we're going to we're going to basically prescribe some of these far right politicians because of their work, because of what they're doing in the West Bank. And it's used almost as a pressure valve alongside, I don't know how much we want to get into this, but some of the more complicit actions or pronouncements of the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah, and actually, on that, before we go into the PA even, there'll be the odd sanctions on various settler groups too, which again just belies how widespread this is, how systematic and organised it is, and how really, like any pogrom, how endorsed it is at the highest and supported and funded at the highest state level and the international levels too. I mean, money is flowing in, particularly to a few of the settlements around Masafer Yatta. There were two towns in particular. Yeah, so you'll get the odd sort of pockets of condemnation that do suggest this is, it's a few bad apples. It's something. It's scattered. It's minor.
Look at us do something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Look at us do something about this lunatic fringe, these rare extremists who operate just of their own volition on a weird little frolic.
Yeah, and no one from Parliament is handing out 10,000 automatic weapons to these people, right?
No, no, no. They're not
Um,
getting Australian Toyotas or sorry, I shouldn't say Australian Toyotas, but they're not getting reinforced alloy on their vehicles.
yeah, yeah.
Made in New South Wales.
Yeah, that's not a weapon, so it's okay, is what I've heard from the Australian Ministry
Exactly.
of Defence. Yeah, we had a guy called James Harris on the podcast mid last year in June. Anyone listening to this can go back and listen to that. It's an episode called Israel and Christian Zionism, and he's quite strong in the Christian faith, but on the other side, like firmly against the kind of Christian connections to the settler groups. And he was telling us about the way that these Zionist Christian groups, these extremist groups in the West, were like infiltrating churches, more or less, or were just the church themselves, and were funding these settler groups. And they'd also go over to these junkets in Israel because of their religious beliefs, right? Around like, oh, the end of the world in the Middle East. But the amount of money is flowing from the wider West into this Western outpost from a range of different political and social groups is immense. It's a
Yeah.
huge money spinner.
The settlement of Carmel, which was, so this is again just back to Old Hathaleen, but El Khair, which is a Bedouin village just right next to that settlement, seems to be under particular pressure because Carmel itself is expanding quite rapidly. And they're trying to get their own temple. They're trying to get the third temple. They will be the site of the third temple. That's their belief anyway, rather than Jerusalem. And they're trying to obtain a red cow and so forth. So again,
Far out.
and that is right in line with the Fundy Christian, probably quite widespread across the states, belief in the third temple, the red cow, and ultimately it's pretty anti-Semitic because they want all the Jews back to Israel, which seems to be, I don't know, they find that beneficial in itself, but then also doesn't it brings on the rapture and so yeah, all that entails.
It's so absurd because we've talked about it obviously on the podcast previously, and we did with James last year, and that kind of more in-depth episode. But it isn't really talked about. It's seen kind of in the realms of conspiracy more, like, oh, is it really about that? And I mean, yes, there is definitely this large amount of political and monetary support that comes via those beliefs, alongside the military-industrial complex and like the kind of imperial projection out of the US, which is like
a real religion.
the major stuff, right? But what was really just wild, I think, in the last week was the ICJ vice president.
Yeah.
Like basically just pinning her flag to the mast and saying she believed that. And we knew that she had been like horrific in the way that she had executed her role as a judge on the ICJ. She's, I think, the only one of the only judges and maybe the only judge that always votes against anything that puts Israel in a bad spot.
She did seem compromised, but not
like that.
A zealot. No.
Yeah. And yeah, it's really wild to see that come in and essentially smear the movement at the same time as Western politicians are starting to make more noises, right? Around their plausible deniability and their, one day everyone will be against this kind of style stand back or stand down. So with the work you're doing there, do you want to take us through, like, as much as you can, how you got set up and like your day-to-day, what you're experiencing, like anything that was particularly egregious that you can talk about, just so people. I think this is one of the things we just really basically don't see it all in New Zealand media, right? You'll see stuff come out through Al Jazeera sometimes, and every now and then something will come through one of the news wires where something quite extreme happens, or there's been enough like wall-to-wall social media coverage that newsrooms are forced to pick it up. So the murder of the guy from No Other Land, for example, like that was everywhere, right? They had to cover it. But I don't think we really get the human stories because for most of Western media, Palestinians are not seen as human.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, I I still haven't seen No Other Land or the Louis Theroux doco on the settlers, which I'm kind of bracing myself to watch. But it's not, So they aren't in particular areas you hear much about. So Masafer Yatta, where I was staying, tiny wee towns, some that are essentially just down to one house, like one house of the multi-generational family, after others have left for the nearby larger town. So it's an Area A, PA run larger town, Yatta. Yeah, and just as parenthetically, I should say that the hope of the occupation is ultimately they will be able to harass everyone out of this area until they just set up in Yatta. They'll, establish refugee camps like they have around Ramallah or other areas further to the north. There are a few different humanitarian groups there doing the same sort of work. The group I was in was international, but a lot of people from America and from Europe, really. Not so many Antipodeans. I would definitely encourage it. Anyone listening to this is really very welcome to hit me up if you want more info or advice, including advice on not getting arrested. And just any kind of insight, because I would endorse it so fucking hard. You're essentially you're sent out. You'll stay with a family. Ideally, you'd be staying with people for a few days at a time. The issue when I was there was that there were a lot of families who needed or who wanted support and not too many activists. So you'd go out if people were shepherding. You'd go out with them and shepherd. Beautiful, bucolic, idyllic times in the fields, unless settlers arrived, which they would do anything from shoot their guns in the air or just sort of roam around with flags kind of menacingly, or take out their own sheep, which were, as a rule, sheep they'd stolen from the locals. So, and that they were, I think everyone's probably heard of the settler youth, the hilltop youth, who are Harridan kids who were set up to take the sheep out. I'll go a bit more into that later. Otherwise, you'd be staying with people overnight, which means you get beautiful Palestinian hospitality, and you'll all eat together and then often sleep together, and then either stay at watch a bit at night or just sort of be ready to wake up if anything happens. For the most part, certainly where I was, most aggressions seem to be in the evening, with in the evenings and the mornings was the most beautiful time of the day, when the settlers would come out. Over Shabbat, the settlers were particularly arsey. That was always just
what?
Yeah, this is dark shit. So they'd dress all in white. They dress in their Shabbat white, but then would be festooned with enormous guns, because if you were keeping Sabbath, you're not strictly allowed to be working. But one of those biblical loopholes, or not biblical, I shouldn't say, Torah loopholes, which I always find really endearing most of the time. But in this case, a loophole was if you were prepared to defend a life, you could work still. So you go out shepherding with your stolen sheep and your massive guns, and then would just and the yarmulke. So it was a combination of piety and just paranoid kind of American style military garb. Just really unsettling shit. Essentially you're staying the night with a family. At absolute very best, there would be no settler presence, and you'd just hang out, have a meal, chain smoke furiously if that was your thing, sleep late, wake early, hang with the kids. And then the heat of the day, I mean, I was there in summer, so the heat of the day was generally a quiet time when not much happened. You could have a bit of a snooze, and then back for the evening. Every few days you go back to your base house with the other activists, have a shower, have a snack, refresh, tiny kit, and then get back out to it again. So that was it was the nature of the work, and at best you get a great relationship with the family. You get to know people. You'd learn a bit of, in my case, fairly terrible Arabic that's mainly related to warning people that settlers are coming, and I don't feel like it's that conversational or applicable, but anyway.
Useful though.
Useful. Useful in just for general horapaki at the time. Yeah, and that's sort of the extent of it. If sometimes if settlers would trespass, say if people came onto families' land, they might call the police, who would generally come accompanied by the army, and they might want you to be just a bit of a liaison there. They would sometimes take it more seriously if a foreigner called the police. The absolute best result you might get there would be someone saying to the cops saying to the settlers, no, this is Palestinian land, you have to go. That was, I've got to say, very rare. Usually they would say, no, this is state land, they can be there, or they might give you a very patronizing lecture on how land ownership works here. And what I think one thing that I certainly hadn't known is everyone's aware of the very diminishing map of Palestine amid encroaching occupation. But after October 7th, there were just granular incursions, just areas around fields, like fields or roads or just sort of strips of land between communities were claimed as state land. So areas that up until less than 2 years ago, Palestinians could take their sheep out onto, suddenly that will be taken up by settlers, and Palestinians they'd be taking their sheep through a tiny backyard area or the centre of the town. And then so then you get a child with a stolen flock just sort of surrounding the village. And your role, if you're doing protected presence, was to document that as well. A lot of the footage we took, the reports we wrote, were filed away B'Tselem previously had presented them at the UN. Again, it felt like you're gathering incremental and irrelevant data to be ignored. However, it was something people would build a case on and still are. Oh, a bit about the settler youth. Because I hadn't known too much about this either. And actually, an Israeli activist I met was a bit more forthcoming. And his view is there'll be, in a decade or so, an excoriating tell-all documentary about how this whole process is cultivated. But you get the teenagers who are often yeshiva college dropouts, or they're juvenile delinquents, or in some cases they're just kids who are recruited via a very specific psychological profile, which would be interesting to gather. And then they're taken away they're underage. They're taken away from their families, and they live on these. No, they're sent to these little outposts. So they're outposts next to so you have your illegal settlements on Palestinian land, and then the settlements will encroach a bit further, and you'll have an outpost that in some cases is a barn, a sheep shed. It might be quite established. In others, it might be just a container that later will become a fenced container, and then a greenhouse, and then some grapevines going down the hill. So you have, or there'll just be a barn, and then there's a bus, and in the bus live the youths who are, I guess, under the supervision of the outpost owners, some rando in the town. And they're so teenagers who will spend the day to their own devices. I think going to Menace locals is a bonus, and they'll be expected to take the sheep out morning and night. Not necessarily that they're not that disciplined about it, and to just wreak whatever havoc they can on the way. So damage property, get the sheep to eat the olive groves, have your sheep run into someone's fence, snip wires, just create havoc. But they're also doing this, among other troubled, isolated youths, maybe under the supervision of a random older male. It's a very strange setup. They're also paid by the state to do it as well, I should say. They're paid by the state. They're given little golf buggy ATV arrangements that they hoon around in. All that's paid for. The guns, the ammo, the settlers have the security forces that a lot of money has come into in the past couple decades. So just cars that are constantly circling the area. A lot of this is from overseas. This is what local activists found, local Palestinian activists. A lot of it is coming from the government as well. There's also been a huge just influx of cash in the last few years.
Well, some of that will come via the government from the US, right?
Yeah, it's very true. Many channels here. And when I spoke to Ramallah, felt that what they've really tried to do quite deliberately is imitate the Palestinian resilience. So they've wanted to become quite militant and fearless, and that was not something she saw was natural to the settlers prior. So that they'd take the land, but they'd enclose themselves in these very paranoid, barbed wire encircled towns, and if they went out into the communities, they'd be quite fearful. But since there's been a surge in foreign weaponry and materials and training.
And genocide complicity, right?
And genocide complicity. They
know they've got cover.
They have total impunity. But there's also, there's just a far more aggressive presence among the settlers in these rural areas anyway. Yeah. So that's a grim thing to contend with. But then you've got the kids themselves who are just little punks, really, and without the backing of the state, there'd be absolutely nothing. And you'll see some, a punk kid square up against a fierce, dignified grandma. It's brutal to watch.
I think the thing that really strikes me then, because I wasn't aware of like the exact mechanisms via which this stuff was done, it's just how designed it is. Like how, because most people have looked at this or have interacted with the history of what's happening in Palestine will understand the way that the state gives cover and like funds and supports and institutionalizes the occupation of Palestinian land, right? And the encroachment of the settler security forces or, whatever you want to call them. But the extent to which they're going out of the way to create the society, to create the institutions, to create the people by doing this to kids is like far more fucked than I like understood it to be.
It's dark stuff. It's incredibly organized and just absolutely coming down from the top. And there'll be, in a more extreme case, obviously with Elder Hetherleen. I think people saw how that unfolded. How the killer was first Enon Levy, who was briefly jailed and then put under house arrest and then exonerated completely. Alder's body, which would have had bullets in it from Levy's gun, was held for.
Was this is this a social media guy?
What social media guy?
The Elon Levy.
Oh no, Yinon.
Yinon. Okay, I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was like, I missed that bit.
No, the grubby little the killer from the Carmel settlement.
Yeah.
So he was. There is total impunity. And it was extreme in a case where someone has been filmed shooting a man, and the autopsy would have shown that, and he was the only one with a gun in the vicinity too, I should say, and the autopsy would have shown that his bullets were in Alder's body still. But that's constant. That's absolutely constant. I've been with families where one of their donkeys is stolen, and then the family will call the police and say they have our donkey, and the police say no, you always had 3 donkeys. You have 3 donkeys now. You had 3 donkeys before. That can't be your donkey. And then they'll go on their way. Minor in the scheme of things, and often people are more likely to let that kind of thing go. But the cover is just relentless, and the stakes are incredibly low, incredibly low for the settlers.
Yeah. Why do you think and just in terms of, and I guess why do people on the ground think this? They're unable to get coverage of this stuff. Is it the same is it just purely the same as with the Gaza stuff? Like, because I guess one of the main differences would be that in the West Bank, there are more international media there, which has been one of the major justifications that Western media has given of not reporting on Gaza, is that they don't have people on the ground.
Yeah, certainly Masafer Yatta, it stopped a little during the Israel-Iran bombing. But there was a large presence of foreign journalists there, and there always is. This is not news that ever seems to break onto mainstream or even indie media. It tends to sort of stay within the province of social media. But yeah, it is there, and also, you don't actually need. I know we are, we're often validated by the presence of foreign journalists, but Palestinians in the West Bank are documenting this themselves. And they're like in Gaza, they're constantly telling the world that this news is always there. People just need to access it. But yeah, it's not penetrating further difficult to. I can rail against this, but we we know why it's happening. But yeah, it's not for lack of effort by people on the ground.
Did you ever meet any journalists or media people while you were there?
I did. I met a lovely woman who was filming a doco for Channel 4 in the UK. Andre X, who's a Jewish Russian who's a real thorn in their side because they can't evict him. He has a huge presence on Twitter and generally amplifying Palestinians. I met him a few times. Interestingly, there was the largest contingent of foreign media that arrived, though, was after the town of Khalat Daba was completely demolished. We're going back to May, and he was actually, a lot of them were invited by Basil, who from No Other Land, to specifically go to the town of Khalat Daba and document things. A UN convoy had arrived around that time too. But the IDF set up, so they declared the town of Tawani a 24-hour closed military zone, which, it's like the good old closed military zone, which is just your, they can pop up anywhere at times that are suitable to the army.
Hey, we want to cover something up.
Yeah, basically. And so they blocked the entrance to Tawani and therefore to Khalat Daba. And the journalists instead went on to Susia, which is nearby, and not yet, as I recall, a closed military zone. I think when people do arrive, they seem to be deflected fairly rapidly, and presence is controlled fairly strictly. On the other hand, though, I mean, there's in Israel where they can keep journalists away at the border, like they do with any activists, which is why you got to say you're a tourist. But yeah, there is still, this is all pretty surmountable, and there's no reason why people couldn't travel there at this stage. Again, I sort of go back to the fact, though, that there are Palestinians on the ground who are tireless and eloquent documenters of.
As anyone who's on social media has seen.
Yes, we've all seen it. It doesn't necessarily penetrate further, but it's there.
Yeah,
it's all there.
I think you're talking about the destruction of an entire town. There's really clear examples of the genocidal intent, right? Even within the West Bank, where the justification of Hamas is even less relevant. But even what you were describing earlier with the state land being interpolated between towns and villages and farmland, that's genocidal. I want to be really clear that it's genocidal design all the way down. Yes. Because it's stopping free movement, it's stopping communities connecting, it's stopping, you're saying people grazing their sheep in places where they've grazed them for generations.
And it's been long term too. And I probably should have started this a bit more, but Masafer Yatta in particular was declared a military firing zone in 1980. Yeah. So this was by the agricultural minister at the time, Ariel Sharon, in fact, and that was. This is absolutely well known. I've tried to explain this to some Israelis, but it's not really widely understood there. But it's been documents show that this was basically all just it's a euphemism for ethnic cleansing. So this land was declared a military zone so they could, under the guise of ethnic cleansing, so they could move the communities out. So it's been quite a slow process. They've expelled a lot of towns already, and towns wholesale, as well as chipped away at smaller ones. So of the sort of firing zone 981, there's the active firing zone, which has towns like Khalat Daba and El Fakit. That was where I was ultimately arrested from. And then there's the inactive firing zone, which is Susia, Tawani, the rest of the area. So they'll put the crackdown in particular on the closed firing zone. So the pretext is that the army is literally using it to for military practice, but they're not, and they, as far as I can tell, never have been. But no one can live there, no one can be there unless they're the residents of a town. And this means that they can expel people from different towns, or they can expel tourists / humanitarian workers / journalists. Yeah. They tend not to expel settlers. So when Khalata Daba was destroyed, that was so the army came in to do the demolition, and then the settlers from the nearby towns came through just to decimate the place. This was a very eerily quiet time for the rest of Masafer Yatta. It was an eerily quiet week because everyone, all the hilltop youth from all the different settlements and outposts converged on Khalata Daba with their combined flocks,
That's
and just
so evil.
it was just
Like the
it was
coordination.
grim. I know. I always felt their numbers were so superior to ours. They could have really coordinated the shit out of us, but they never did. It was just on this one occasion they all converged and they just surged through and trashed people's houses, had their sheep and goat eat the remainders of the crops or the olive groves. That was always the hardest thing to watch. The olives grow very, very slowly. These were, that apart from the herds were people's livelihoods. And so this was under the benevolent gaze of the army. They just moved through and destroyed everything remaining.
Because the army often shows up at these events and just sits there, don't they?
Oh, yeah. Every now and then, the army would actually intervene, I think, because it would spare them the paperwork of having to deal with a massacre. So the first time, yeah. So they might deflect. The first time I dealt with the army my first experience was hearing volleys of gunfire moving through the hills, not knowing where it was coming from, and then later realizing, so some settlers had come down from Maon to try and attack people in Tuani. So they'd come down with, their own guns and baseball bats and masked. They started to dress all in black, all masked up. They'd take on, it was like they were trying to look like Mujahideen. It was interesting how there was no absence of any kind of national character for these people. As if they were shepherding, they'd try and speak like Palestinians. They'd try and ride their donkeys like Palestinians. They'd speak in Arabic to the sheep. I know, it was insane. It was insane, Kyle. And then when they'd get in the gangs, that they'd just anyway. So they'd come down from the hills, and then the army was standing between them and the town of Tuani and just firing live rounds into the air. After which point the settlers moved on to attack another town, and then the army started arresting all the Palestinians present. They were fortunately, though, deterred from this because news came from the next town the settlers had marauded to in their massive kind of pogroming gang, and the army moved on as well. So, yeah. So they would, they would step in just to, spare something incredibly awkward happening, unless they really want. It was all by design, like the Khalata Daba destruction, where it was in their interests for settlers to move through and repel the rest of the people who had remained there.
Yeah.
So sort of like a militia, basically. You had your formal army and you had your marauding militias.
It's just, because we know this is happening, right? Like it's something I'm relatively well acquainted with, and have been for years and years. But hearing the specific examples is just something else altogether. How, it's been about a month since you were there, did you say?
Yeah, I guess 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, and how, if at all, does the uptick at times of coverage or like this semblance of political will in the West, how is that read by Palestinians in the West Bank? I'm just seeing just recently, even in the last week, even the BBC has been reporting on masked Israeli settlers. The story I've got up here, where the settlers in an attack in Nablus just destroyed some olive groves, and that's now getting coverage. Which, every so often you'll see that happen, but it's alongside a larger number of reports like that from a range of media organizations in the West, as well as whatever Christopher Luxon was saying last week, or attempting to say, and the Five Eyes nations kind of coming out and giving a statement of some pathetic kind. Is that ever seen as okay, maybe things are shifting, or is it just we have no hope that they actually mean it this time?
I mean, one thing I did notice is that, and I don't mean to patronize or fetishize Palestinians in any way, but I was awed by how people always do have hope. But there's no alternative not to have hope. I do not feel like this is a hope that's stirred particularly by the rest of the world. And I even had, it was helpful to be there for a while because you get, there's going to be a bit more candor. I even felt people were being quite gentle when they would, because some people would say, you know, why if you've come from New Zealand, that's a fascinating far off place. I always enjoy showing kids on the map because you've got to swing around, all the way around the ocean. You know, you've come so far, and why are you doing this? And I'd say, well, like, you know, I support Palestine, or you're trying to say something too trite. And then I often had people say, well, everyone seems to support Palestine, and nothing is changing. And that just always fell very heavily on me. And yeah, I mean, there's been more disenchantment, more mainstream disenchantment with Israel across the Anglosphere. Certainly, people are turning out for large protests. It doesn't seem to be. I don't feel like they should patronize us in this either. Like, yeah, you're doing your best. Why not? It doesn't seem to be changing. It's not changing anything. I had a group of teachers at a school I was at say, you know, what do you think? What should we be doing? What should we be doing to get the world to support us more? And I was at a loss. I sort of had to say, well, you're doing all you can. You're doing more than you should. You are fighting really fucking hard here, and we're actually really we're failing you. And they were saying, well, what do you think? What do you think you should be doing? I said, well, at the least there should be a full blockade of trade to Israel. They should be isolated the way we eventually isolated South Africa. There should be huge embargoes. We should be barricading munitions factories and stopping ships from being loaded. There should be an actual, you know, full Napasaran, complete cease of movement at the very least. You know, some sort of bloody uprising might be more reasonable, and they were all quite bolshy, so they were in favour of that. But just at the fucking least, I just feel you'd be despairing, thinking, oh, they're doing a march again. Oh, there they go. Yeah. Well, that's nice. That's nice that they're showing their support. Yeah, it's just it's hard as hell. I think people do appreciate the solidarity. And a slow kind of flickering into life of some sort of sense of the injustice of it all, but it's not really changing anything just yet. And really, there's been a huge ramping up across the West Bank and the settler terrorism there, as people are terrified. Really, and Israelis are terrified of the war in Gaza ending, the genocide ending, because that is then suddenly going to turn attention back onto the West Bank. And it really seems like they would like for that to be completely demolished before that happens.
Yeah.
Which I think, they won't be able to do that as overtly as they have been with Gaza. But I think there was a Netanyahu the other day was saying something about how they need I can't remember how he put it. It was a gruesome kind of euphemism though. Like, we need a quiet occupation. They don't want people to notice that.
Yeah,
and this has been don't seem to be.
This has been the strategy for like 70 to 80 years, right? Like that is the point, and it's why. And then they get to go and say like, oh, if we'd wanted to do a genocide, we could have just done it. You know, that kind of like heinous shit.
Unless you wanted to do a genocide that the world just sort of stood by and let happen because you're doing it so incrementally, we just sort of pretended you weren't doing it. That's how you do it, really, frankly.
And it's what they are doing. One of the things that some of the stuff you've described today has made really clear is just the amount of resource necessary, the amount of free-flowing money to these organizations, and how necessary that is for them to exist like this. And you see these, every so often, we're sanctioning this, we're sanctioning that, but it doesn't seem to stop it.
No.
Even, where was it? Norway's wealth fund excludes 6 more Israeli companies linked to West Bank, Gaza. France urges Israel to abandon controversial West Bank E1 settlement plan. You'll have this stuff and oh, look, we're doing something from the West, but the money is still going in. And I figure it's just because most of the money is from the US and it goes via the state and then kind of goes into a black box and then comes out kind of washed clean, so no one feels like they're supporting settlers.
I mean, potentially, or they're a bit more overt about it. It'll be interesting to follow the money if someone with the research now, some fluent in Hebrew, maybe a few languages. I know a lot of China's managing a lot of they're supplying a lot of materials for the West Bank settlements too. I mean, it's not just America. It's not even just the West. This really seems to be a worldwide collaborative effort.
It's construction companies in the military-industrial complex, and that happens to involve everybody and
Yes.
the wider economy, right?
Yep. Quite a wide industry.
So you end up being deported.
Mm.
How much are you able to tell us about your like last little bit of time in the West Bank?
I can tell about that because I'm now banned from entering, so I don't really
Hey,
have to keep anything
that
to
truly
quiet.
a badge of honor.
What didn't help was I had actually previously been apprehended. So this was actually I'll go back to the original the first time, actually no, it was the second time I was detained, but the first time I was arrested was near Susir and just outside the area A perimeter of Yatta. So this was a lovely family, so lovely I would cry if I thought about it too much. Who had that their house seemed to be the only one between a military base and Area A. So obviously quite strategic land for the army. And they'd been menaced repeatedly by some settlers who'd come through, trash the garden, and attack the cows and the sheep and try and send them away. They'd recorded this a few times and had a lawyer acting for them say, actually, no, sorry, I'm going to switch back a bit, go back a bit. So they'd had their house trashed by settlers, and then the army would come at night. So people would come at midnight in army gear and threaten them and say, you have to leave this house or we will burn it down. And they'd take an elderly man, the patriarch's father, they'd take him away, dump him at the outskirts of town and have him walk home in the morning. So this had happened twice. And then they wanted protective presence there because they'd been told by their lawyers, actually, these people aren't the army. They're settlers dressed as the army, which often happens. And so settlers dressed as the army, that seems to bestow you with the authority of the army. You seem to be able to manage deportations and
Well, essentially, they are the army at that point because if the army
essentially,
didn't want them to do it, they'd stop them
exactly.
doing
I
it.
know they're all. It's so fused. The settlers are the army. The army is the settlers. You can vaguely tell them apart because they generally look a little more scruffy. So you've got your army, you've got your reservists, and then you just seem to have settlers who put on an army uniform. So they all seem to be imbued with the same authority though. But so these people have been advised to just have some foreigners stay with you when they come over to burn your house down. Make sure you're filming them, and then we can identify them. So that happened as it was. We waited till midnight. No one arrived. We all went to sleep. And then in the morning, the army came through. We weren't quite sure if it was the army, the fake army, or whatever. They dragged the elderly man into the car again, and they took me and the woman I was with out onto the street, where they bellowed at us a little and told us to stop filming them. I didn't stop filming right away, and then I wouldn't give them my phone. And then we were taken in the armoured car to the army base, and then to a police station, and then to an immigration centre where we thought it was all over for us. And then we were just kind of released onto the street around just piles of rubbish and told to just stay in Israel. Don't go back there. Stay in Israel where it's beautiful.
Why is there rubbish in the streets?
I don't know why there was rubbish everywhere and why they kept saying it was so beautiful. This is now in 48. This isn't the sprawl surrounding Tel Aviv. I'm telling the story very badly, but by this point we'd been detained for 16 hours. We hadn't eaten, but we've been told we shouldn't be going back to Palestine, but to stay in beautiful Israel, which is kind of like Florida suburban sprawl. But there also happened to be, dinky little condos and shitty little shops and piles of rubbish. And we agreed Israel was very beautiful, and we made our way into the night. By this point, we were like several hours drive away from where we were meant to be. So anyway, so they had me on file. So the second time I was arrested, this was in the closed firing zone, so around Al Fakit. Previous few nights, so the settler youths had come through the town, just sort of marauding through on their little ATVs, and we'd recorded them, so they knew there were foreigners there. And Al Fakit is not far from Khalat Adaba, so I personally was very worried that there'd be the same sort of model there. So when then the settlers came back in the morning and just sort of hung around in the town, menacing people, basically, threatening to stab some. And then the villagers called the police, who came with the army. And then the army said, this is a firing zone to me, and the people asked, well, if you have to leave. And I said, well, I'm not leaving unless they leave. And then, so then I was taken away in an armored car. In hindsight, I guess I could have hid. I could have asked someone to drive me away from town. It just, in the moment, I felt like I couldn't leave, especially while the settler youth were going to stay. It just, and I also thought I might be able to talk myself out of it again, but I was not. I was taken back to a police station, which was just a very, very strange affair. This was also on Shabbat. Like I said, they turn out in great numbers, pissed and really aggressive on Shabbat. So I was in a pretty much abandoned police station where the cop who arrested me was doing his prayer, sort of bowing, very devout, with his massive guns bobbling against his ass. It was just it was all quite strange. I was questioned aggressively about why I hadn't respected the IDF enough to obey their directions to leave. I still thought I could talk myself out of it, so I just tried to explain that I was really concerned about the villagers who'd had threats made to them by known criminals, and the army had not assured me these people would be leaving. So I said I would leave once they did. How dare I make ultimatums to the IDF? And she flicked her hair in great rage. And I thought it all went quite well, but then at the end of the interview I was told I was going back to New Zealand and they would be paying for it. And I was like, well, you know what? I've lived in America for a year now. I've been an American taxpayer. I have paid your fucking salary, so you can pay for my plane ticket. And they were like, Anyway, from there things got worse. I kept mouthing off, so they put me in shackles and handcuffs, and kept. Actually, this is where things got surreal. They
like more surreal.
More surreal. I was in the back of a van, possibly with supplied by Australian Steel, an armored van driven round and round various prisons in Israeli 48. But there seemed to be no room at the inns. They kept that. They'd take my shackled self, and I'd sort of shuffle into the prisons. We'd sit down for a while. They'd try and negotiate with some guards. Then we'd go back to the car. We arrived at a few prisons that seemed to be closed, and then after hours of driving, we got right back to where we'd started again. I said,
why?
There was a bed there. There was a cell. There was a cell they could put me in. I told them for a fascist police state, they were just wildly, breathtakingly, blunderingly incompetent. Like you don't need to subscribe to apocrypha about Fash making the trains run on time. You think
no, it was bullshit anyway, right? Like
I know it
was propaganda, like to start with.
But you think there's some kind of administrative baseline competence. Anyway,
absolutely not.
So they put me in a jail cell by myself, and I received neither food nor water. Anyway, the next day went to immigration detention, which was an office at Ben Gurion Airport by this point, filled with couches and people from many lands, including 3 Thai women. I was reflecting on that because there was just that news the other day about 100% of Thai workers being sexually assaulted.
Incredibly fucked.
Incredibly fucked.
Sad, just horrific.
There was a language barrier, so I don't really know what had happened, but I understood that they'd lost their jobs and therefore they'd lost their visas. So I think what is understood now is that after October 7th, they couldn't bring in Palestinians to do cheap labor anymore, or they chose not to. So a lot of mostly Thai and Filipino workers were flown in, treated disgracefully, paid like shit, and then deported on a whim. So there were some Thai people. At some point, an Indian family came through, multi-generations, very well-heeled, polite, well-dressed, coming on tourist visas that maybe something had administratively glitched there, but they were treated like shit by the guards, just almost racially abused. It was not easy to watch. So for the 5 hours they were there, they were just, treated, though you could tell they were baffled by it too. And then there was the indignity of, some poor elderly people having to ask many times to go to the toilet, because we'd have to be escorted to the toilets if we went. By this point, I'd just sort of settled into it and was sleeping on a couch. A poor American woman came through at one point at about 3 a.m. Her tourist visa had failed. She'd actually come in good faith as a tourist, but she'd very candidly but ill-advisedly told them she was going to do some religious tourism of Christian and Jewish and Muslim sacred sites. And yeah, big mistake, huge mistake. And then she was like, oh, they were for 5 hours. They would ask me for 5 hours, did I support Hamas? I'm like, no, I do not support Hamas. My embassy will be hearing about this. Poor thing. She was just full of just American confidence. And I was like, I don't know if your embassy is really that concerned with Israeli human rights atrocities. And she's like, oh, I know. Anyway, so that was good times in Israeli detention. And then they drove me to the border and sent me over. By that point, I was no longer shackled, and I was given the grace of sitting in the back of a non-armored car.
Which border?
Oh, the Jordan.
Okay.
Yeah. They thought against. I think that the police didn't understand that actually they couldn't have sent me back to Aotearoa because that would have required a connecting flight.
Right.
And they don't pay for you to have a connecting flight or something. And I was like, well, I'm not paying for my own flight back, because all my shit is in Jordan, so you can send me to Jordan. That's what they did. And I regret, I have many regrets, but a big one is that when I got through the gate and they were yelling at me to go straight to the bus, but I wasn't quite dressed halal, so I didn't quite want to go through. And I said I was going to go to the hammam, I was going to go to the bathroom. And I should have yelled out Free Palestine. I should have yelled out Free Palestine across the gate in Jordan. There's nothing they could have done. But I'd had no breakfast. I hadn't eaten in days, apart from intermittent Israeli food. And I wasn't at my best. But I will regret that to this day.
What an experience.
Yeah.
When you're encouraging people to like try and reach out to ISM earlier if they were interested in this, but like, what else can we even be doing here? So
I'm in Oz now, where I think that there's more of an imperative here, I'd say, to cease trade, weapons trade in particular.
Yeah, some pretty specific things, right?
Yeah. I mean, and Aotearoa is still trading with Israel. I mean, I think this requires some granular research, but if you can find out what's going there, make it stop. If you can find out who's exporting things, make that stop. A lot of a complete isolation of Israel is going to be more important at this juncture than recognizing Palestine. That's not something Palestinians are asking for right now. We can make sure the genocide and the ethnic cleansing stop first. That they don't need our recognition, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. But I mean, recognizing Palestine just for it to be wiped off the map is like, this is
less
what
than helpful.
The US wants, right? This is what Western politicians like. This is why they're offering that, is because they know that the genocide will continue.
Yes, yeah, and that they can launder their own reputations as it happens to.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I know Luxon didn't sign the last open letter from various quizzling countries, but I don't think it matters particularly at this point what letters are written. It does seem to be largely for plausible deniability, so you can later say, well, we asked them nicely. You can see on these various dates, we asked them very nicely to stop all that nonsense.
And therefore, we shouldn't be taken to the Hague.
Yeah, exactly. I am disappointed, I've got to say, with the Australian union movement, which I've previously worked for and would like to again. After all this, there should be complete trade bans, and that should not be controversial.
Because we've seen a couple of those happen in European countries, right?
Yeah,
with unions blockading and just refusing to load.
Yeah, that's incredibly strong.
Because haven't seen it happening here in Aotearoa either, right? Like
no, and there were some flurries of this in Nam actually, on the docks, I believe, a couple of years ago. Anyway, I wasn't here, but there has been some good activism here. It's just, it's been some blockades of some of the known manufacturers of weapons. I mean, a lot of that I'm trying to help someone rather with a bit of research into that now as to actually which manufacturers are making the parts, the components that are ultimately getting to Israel. All this kind of thing is incredibly opaque. It'd be good to find out which of these places are union shops, if any of them are. If workers there could be compelled to strike, or if not, can people be compelled to blockade? I just think we don't seem to have mustered up the will at this point for an international brigade. But I think you need the spirit of Napasaran in any kind of flow of goods. some kind of seizing of the means of production.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that's my answer to everything, but I think
Hey, look,
that could be kind of useful
that's
here.
what being a unionist is about. What do you, I guess just last thing to touch on. We've seen the prescribing of Palestine action in the UK. We've seen here in New Zealand a couple of changes to bills around terrorism and rules around protests and things like that. Like protesting outside people's homes, I think, is one of the more recent ones. If there was to be more activity, like direct activism of the sort that we saw Albert being targeted with in the UK, right? Do you think Australia or New Zealand, from your read, would likely have the will to, or the just rabidity to crack down in the same way that Keir Starmer's Labour government has?
I would say state Labor governments here certainly want to. And there's been quite a bit of groundwork towards that already. And if you're following that, there were some that these have been, they were instantly, very confidently declared anti-Semitic attacks. So on some synagogues. This is later not proven to be the case. However, no one's actually walked back any of the new legislation that was ready to go uncannily quickly after the attacks, or various collaborations with, say, state governments, Australian Federal Police, and some foreign bodies. So yeah, and I know there is certainly a lot of pressure from Australia's honestly minor, tiny, but persuasive, apparently, Zionist lobby to crack down on more of the weekly protests that are happening. I'd be surprised if there is that level of rabidity, as you say, in Aotearoa. But also, I mean, look, yeah, you're on the ground. I know there's been some protests and a lot of great activism in Tamaki, but I don't. Is there necessarily anything to crack down on at this point?
I'm shaking my head for the audience. Not particularly.
Yeah.
I know there have been some cases and maybe people made examples of, but there's been no targeting of the economic ties, I guess I'd say, that different companies or corporations or whoever have with Israel. A lot of really good, like, people are still turning out in like pretty decent numbers for the marches. I think what happened with Boris Warbrick in the House last week really galvanized a lot of people, finally being able to say, hey, look, there's a politician who is willing. I mean, Chloe's been there every week. I want to be clear about that. She's been doing fantastic work.
She is still in jazz.
But seeing on the news a politician having direct consequences to them, drawing direct consequences for their activism and for their stance, I think has given a little bit more permission. I think the marches over the weekend were quite a bit bigger than they have been recently. But the decision makers are pretty inoculated against protest, and both in the corporate and political world. Simon Court got up in the same debate that Chloe got kicked out, got up in the House and called the opposition Hamas supporters and all this other kind of shit, like outright genocide apologia, if not further than that, with no consequence really. And the media here, decision makers within the media, seem similarly inoculated against any public support for Palestine
To put it
or
mildly.
against genocide, and continue to selectively choose news wires that sometimes go as far as framing up Israel as a victim, or Netanyahu just saying everyone's Hamas, right? Like, without any caveats. So yeah, it's hard when you're a country of 5 million, right? Like, it's so easy for the powerful, in this case, Five Eyes interests, I think, predominantly, who may or may not even be like outright Zionists, to kind of tie things up and ensure there's kind of like a blanket, not like soft coordination, as well as some like hard coordination, to ensure that even though the public has been widely against what's happening in Palestine since November 2023, I think was the first poll, showed something like 63% of people wanted a ceasefire. Meaningless to media in terms of getting clicks or reporting on things that people want to hear, and to politicians. And I don't really know what the solution is to that. That isn't escalation. And that's not to for reasons of actionable content. It's not to say people should do that. It's just an analysis of the state of the politics of genocide in this country and what the available levers currently are.
I mean, regarding, I guess, escalation, this is all speaking so theoretically. You could posit that it has been the fact that Palestine Action in the UK did take that there was a more militant stance earlier on. There was, targeting of very specific companies. There was active destruction of property.
Yeah.
And it's that in itself that then, I won't say it compelled, but it certainly, it was the catalyst for the far more authoritarian crackdown. I think that would happen here. Definitely. I actually think you'd find they have some legislation very ready to go, and a media very willing to.
In Australia.
In Australia and Aotearoa. I would say that's not a reason not to theoretically, because what you are seeing in the UK is it has been that very repressive crackdown that's actually galvanized a lot more public support.
Yeah. I mean, when you see 170-year-olds getting arrested for holding a sign, people start to go, wait a sec.
And they might not have been on board with the young kids at first, and smashing up the weapons factories, but the optics of the sweet grandmas getting arrested with their placards. So it's that I would say is an argument theoretically for an escalation that will then force their hand, that then might galvanize ours.
But I should say, stay safe, everybody.
Stay safe, everybody, and yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of ways, right? There's plenty of ways to do direct protest that are not going to be a catalyst for more authoritarian crackdowns, or be harder to be. We harder justifications. We should be inundating the politicians of this government with emails. They should not be able to open their inboxes.
No.
Right? Make it difficult for them to govern.
Yeah.
There's a whole range of stuff, and it would be good to see a little bit more of that. I mean, MPs still electorate MPs. Turn up at their office hours, right? Be like, hey, this is the most important thing to me. There's nothing else more important. Yeah, I know about cost of living. Yeah, it's real tough. But you know what's more important? We're actively supporting a genocide, and we probably shouldn't be. So yeah, plenty of options still available, plenty of headroom.
Indeed.
Any final things you want to just touch on or appeal to for?
Probably not so much. Although just one thought I kept having today, it would be a very interesting tension. Watching governments, the way they are drilling down over some tiny Zionist voices against growing popular and populist causes. And it would be gruesomely interesting if it wasn't against the backdrop of a live streamed genocide that has changed me, certainly at a molecular level, and it's hard to be patient, I suppose, with what feels like incremental changes at this point, and the feeling that we have to drag people inch by inch. We have to drag elected leaders inch by inch. That's not really much of a point, but that was just something I was musing over with my soft, fluey brain.
Thank you. And I guess finally, do you want people to find you online? And if you do, where can they find you?
Oh God, I guess Twitter for my sins. And maybe people who could contact. I might give you my email. If people could contact me through the pod. Is that too annoying? Or just. Actually, let's just say Twitter at this point. I will be happy to talk to anyone who's keen to go and do protective presence work. It doesn't have to be with the ISM. There are a few groups doing it. I personally found it just depends on who you work with at the time. I really enjoyed working with them. Yeah, I can put you in touch with other people on the ground, or certainly in Naarm, meet with people to discuss, or in Poniki, probably get you in touch with others. I would endorse this for so many reasons, not even all of them altruistic. It is just, even go to Palestine as a tourist. It is a fucking lovely, lovely place to visit. You will not necessarily be held at gunpoint by the IDF, but it's surprising how quickly you get used to that. But it will not necessarily happen. It's fine. You'll meet wonderful people. It's a beautiful country. It will be free in our lifetime.
Fantastic. I'll drop your link to your Twitter in the summary. Thank you so much for joining us and kind of talking about everything that has been going on over there. Just horrific. I've used the word too many times on this episode.
What else can you say amid the horrors?
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to our audience for listening. You get to hear things here that you don't hear anywhere else. If you want to support that, there's a Patreon link in the summary. Give us some money. Help us out. Reach out to Mardi and get in contact with international organizations and go and do some stuff. That sounds like lots of fun and also gratifying and good and morally correct. Share, like, subscribe. Let people know that there's independent media out there in Aotearoa that is covering this stuff while the rest of our media do whatever the fuck they're doing. That's been another episode of 1 of 200. We'll catch you on the weekend for current events.
If artifices are then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions. And I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when the criticism cost me ought to stay. Cause I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking rain. It feels like we're